You think you know your own child, until she slides a paper across the table and says, "Just sign it, Mom. It's nothing important." That's what my daughter said, right before she almost took away everything I ever worked for. But what she didn't know was that I already had a plan. I'm 74 years old. I've lived long enough to see good people turn bad when money shows up. But I never thought my own daughter would be one of them. This story isn't easy to tell, but maybe if I share it, someone watching this will think twice before trusting someone just because they share your blood. After my husband passed away, I was left with a small house, some savings, and a few investments we'd made together. Nothing crazy. Until one day an old friend called me to tell me that one of our land investments had sold. My share? $4 million. I remember sitting in that kitchen chair, my tea turning cold as I stared at that check. $4 million. After taxes, after everything. Enough to change lives. When I told my daughter Sarah, she hugged me tight. Too tight, she smiled and said, "Mom, you can finally rest now. No more worrying about bills or the house." It sounded sweet, but something about her tone felt rehearsed. A week later, she started talking about helping me manage my finances. She said, "Mom, it's a lot of money. You don't want to mess it up. Let me help you with some paperwork." That's when things started to change. At first, she was all love and concern. She'd call me every morning, ask if I took my medicine, if I'd eaten, if I was okay. Then slowly, she started bringing me documents to sign. Things she said were for insurance, taxes, just routine things. But one day, as I was about to sign one of them, I noticed something strange. The paper didn't have my usual insurance company's name. The fine print said something about transferring assets. I asked her what it was. She laughed softly and said, "Mom, you wouldn't understand all that legal stuff. It's just for protection." That word, protection, hit me wrong that night. I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the streetlight flicker outside, and something inside me said, "Don't sign another thing." The next morning, when Sarah came by again, I told her I needed time. She smiled, but her eyes, cold, sharp. She said, "Mom, don't overthink this. You're getting old and things are only going to get harder." And that's when I realized she wasn't helping me. She was planning something. A few days later, she brought a man with her, said he was a lawyer. He sat in my living room, smiled politely, and said he just needed my signature to finalize the trust. He made it sound like it was all for my safety, but my gut told me otherwise. So I played along. I asked questions. I pretended to be confused, helpless, slow. Meanwhile, I called my late husband's real lawyer, Mr. Harris. He'd been our family attorney for decades. When I explained what was happening, he told me, "Don't sign a single thing. Bring everything to my office." That night, I made copies of every document Sarah had given me. Each one had carefully hidden legal jargon that basically handed over my entire estate to her. My house, my money, my investments, all of it. The next morning, I asked Sarah to come by again. I smiled and told her I'd been thinking about her offer. She looked relieved. She didn't know I already had a plan. When she arrived, she brought that same lawyer again. They sat across from me at the dining table. I held the papers in my hand, my heart pounding. Sarah said softly, "Mom, this will make everything easier. Just sign here, okay?" I nodded. "Of course, sweetheart. I trust you completely." I took the pen, then stopped. I looked at her lawyer and said, "Before I sign, maybe we should call Mr. Harris, just to make sure everything's proper." The color drained from her face. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking. "You don't need to call him. I already checked everything." But I dialed anyway, put the call on speaker. When Mr. Harris answered, he said, "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. Did you bring the documents I told you about?" The room went silent. Sarah's lawyer froze. Sarah glared at me. I smiled and said, "Yes, dear. I have them right here. and I have a few guests with me who wanted me to sign them." Her lawyer stammered, then said, "We'll just come back another time." But Mr. Harris interrupted. "That won't be necessary. I'll be there in 10 minutes. You should have seen their faces. When Mr. Harris arrived, he went through the documents in front of everyone. He turned to Sarah and said, "You were about to illegally transfer $4 million from your mother's estate into your own name." "That's fraud," Sarah's voice cracked. "Mom, I was just trying to help." But I stopped her. "Help me? By stealing from me?" She broke down crying, but I didn't feel sorry. I'd seen what greed did to people before. I just never thought I'd see it in my own child. I didn't press charges. I could have. Mr. Harris said we had enough evidence. But I couldn't bring myself to send my own daughter to jail. Instead, I cut her off completely. I set up a new trust, one that would go directly to my grandchildren's education and charity. Sarah would get nothing until she proved she could be trusted again. It's been 2 years now. She still calls sometimes. Sometimes I answer, sometimes I don't. But I sleep peacefully, knowing that my plan worked. You can love your family with all your heart. But you should never let love blind you to the truth. People change when money gets involved. But if you stay smart, stay calm, and trust your instincts, you'll always stay one step ahead. Watch my next story. It's about the day my grandson found out what was really hidden inside my old purse. You know what hurts more than betrayal? When the person who tried to destroy you suddenly starts crying and says you ruined her life. That's what my daughter did. But when I found out what she was really hiding, my heart broke all over again. It had been 2 months since that day. 2 months since I stopped her from stealing every dollar I had. I thought I'd moved on. I thought I could heal. But guilt is a strange thing. Even when you're right, it finds a way to whisper. What if you went too far? And that whisper, it almost made me forgive her. Almost. One morning, my phone rang. It was Sarah. Her voice sounded small, weak. Nothing like the confident woman who once told me, "You're getting old, Mom. Let me handle the money." "Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "I lost my job. Mark left me. I don't have anywhere to go." For a moment, I froze, because no matter what she'd done, she was still my daughter. And hearing her cry like that, it broke me. She begged me to let her come home, just for a while. Against my better judgment, I said yes. The first night she came back, she looked different. Pale, tired, thin. Her eyes had that empty look, like someone who hadn't slept in days. She hugged me tight. I wanted to believe it was real this time. For a few days, things were peaceful. We'd eat breakfast together, talk about little things like we used to. But soon, I noticed small things that didn't make sense. She was always on her phone, whispering in the other room. And one day, I found a pile of unopened bills in her purse. Credit cards, loans, even something from a payday lender. When I asked, she snapped, "Mom, stop snooping through my stuff." I said I'll handle it. But she wasn't handling it, and I knew where this was going. 2 weeks later, I caught her sneaking into my study. She said she was looking for her charger. But my study isn't exactly where someone would charge their phone. When I went inside after she left, I saw my safe, slightly moved. Not opened, but moved. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, waiting, pretending to be asleep on the couch. Around midnight, I heard soft footsteps, and there she was, tiptoeing toward the study with a flashlight in her hand. I whispered, "What are you doing, Sarah?" She froze. "Mom," she stammered. I was just checking something." "Checking what?" "My safe." She didn't answer, just stood there shaking. I told her to go back to her room. And that's when she snapped, "Why are you treating me like a criminal? I'm your daughter." Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned with anger. She stormed off, slammed her door, and the house went quiet again. But that silence felt heavier than ever. The next morning, I got a call from my lawyer, Mr. Harris. He told me something I wasn't prepared for. Apparently, Sarah had tried to contact his office, pretending to be me. She'd asked for updated banking information and tried to get access to my trust account. Thankfully, his assistant recognized her voice. I sat there holding the phone, my heart sinking. It wasn't over. She was still trying to take the money. That night, I confronted her. I told her I knew about the call. Her face went white. She broke down crying. "Mom, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I needed help. Please don't hate me." Tears rolled down her face, and for a moment I wanted to believe her, until she said something that changed everything. "I had no choice, Mom. They were going to hurt me." I froze. "Who's they?" She looked terrified. "The people I owe money to." Turns out, after she lost her job, Sarah had fallen deep into debt. Credit cards, personal loans, even gambling. She'd met a man online who convinced her to invest in crypto. He disappeared and she was left with nothing, except the debt collectors. That's when she tried to steal my money, not because she hated me, but because she thought it was the only way to survive. I didn't know whether to scream or cry. She'd nearly destroyed my trust, my peace, and my heart, all because she couldn't ask for help. I told her, "You could have come to me. I would have helped you." She whispered, "I thought you'd say no." That sentence hit me harder than anything else. I sat in silence for a long time. Then I made a decision. I called Mr. Harris again. I asked him to come over with some papers. Sarah looked terrified. "Mom, please don't report me," I said. "I'm not reporting you, but this ends today." When Mr. Harris arrived, I told him to create a controlled trust fund for Sarah. She'd get enough to survive, pay off her debts, but every dollar would be monitored. No access, no loopholes. Sarah cried again, but this time, it felt different. Not angry tears, just tired ones. Over the next few weeks, things slowly calmed down. She started working part-time, attending therapy. And for once, she didn't ask for money. She even apologized again, this time sincerely. I'd like to say everything went back to normal, but it didn't. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. Still, I started to see small changes. She'd cook dinner for us, take walks with me in the garden and talk. Really talk. About her regrets, her mistakes, her fears. And maybe for the first time in years, I saw the daughter I used to know. One evening, she handed me a note. It said, "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me. I don't deserve it, but I'm going to earn it back." I kept that note in my bedside drawer, right next to the one thing I never thought I'd still have. Hope. Money can twist people in ways you can't imagine. It can turn love into greed, kindness into manipulation. But sometimes, it's not the money. It's the fear of losing, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of not being enough. I still don't know if Sarah will ever fully change. But I know this. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means protecting yourself, but leaving the door open, just a crack, for love to walk through again. Watch my next story. It's about the night a stranger showed up at my door, claiming to be my late husband's son. It was raining that night, the kind of rain that makes you feel something bad is about to happen. And when I opened my door, I saw a man standing there, soaked, shivering, holding a folder in his hand. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You don't know me, ma'am, but your husband was my father. I thought I'd lived through enough heartbreak already, losing my husband, my daughter's betrayal, the sleepless nights wondering where it all went wrong. But this was something else. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard him. Maybe he was some scammer. But when I saw the old photograph in his trembling hand, my husband's face next to a young woman I'd never seen before, my heart stopped. The man said his name was Daniel. He was in his mid-30s, quiet, polite. But there was something in his eyes, something that reminded me of my husband. That same tired kindness, that same way of speaking softly even when nervous. I didn't invite him in right away. I just stood there, my mind spinning. Finally, I said, "If this is some kind of joke, it's not funny." He looked down and said quietly, "I wish it was, ma'am, but I've spent the last 6 months trying to find you." Something about his voice made me believe him, at least for a moment. I finally told him to come inside. He took off his wet coat, sat at the edge of my couch like he was afraid to touch anything. He opened that folder and pulled out documents. A birth certificate, some old letters, even a photograph of my husband, years younger, holding a baby. I couldn't breathe. The dates matched. The handwriting on the letters. It was my husband's. There was no denying it. Daniel said his mother passed away recently and left him a box with these letters. Apparently, she and my husband had met before he ever met me. She never told him about the child, and my husband never mentioned her to me. If what this man said was true, then for over 40 years, I'd been living with a lie. I didn't want to believe it. Not after everything. Not after the life my husband and I built together. But deep down, there had always been moments, like the nights he'd stare at the old photo albums too long. The way he sometimes looked out the window after we argued, lost in thought. I always thought it was just the past haunting him. I never imagined who that past was. I asked Daniel what he wanted. He said softly, "Nothing. I just wanted to know who he was, to see the family he left behind." He wasn't asking for money, not even recognition, just truth. And somehow, that made it even harder to take. I told him to come back the next morning. That night, I barely slept. I sat by the fire holding those letters in my hands, reading my husband's words to another woman. He'd written things like, "I wish I could be there to see him grow up." And, "One day, I'll make things right," but he never did. He took that secret to his grave. When the morning came, I called Mr. Harris, my lawyer and old friend. He told me to verify everything before reacting. We ran a DNA test. While waiting for the results, I spent time talking to Daniel. He told me stories about his mother, how she never married again, how she always spoke kindly about my husband. He said she never wanted to ruin anyone's life. And as much as I wanted to stay angry, I couldn't. Because Daniel wasn't the one who lied. My husband was. The results came back after a week. I sat at the kitchen table, envelope in hand, heart pounding like a drum. Positive. 99.9% match. He was my husband's son. I don't even remember how long I sat there, staring at that paper. I felt betrayed all over again. But this time by someone who wasn't even here to explain himself. Daniel came over later that day. When I told him the truth, he looked down and said, "I didn't want to hurt you. I just needed to know." There was no anger in his voice, no greed, just quiet pain. Then he handed me something. It was a small envelope. Inside was a note, written in my husband's handwriting. "If you're reading this, then you found him. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her more than life itself." I couldn't hold back my tears. He'd written it years ago, and somehow it had found its way to me. After that day, I started seeing Daniel more often, not as a stranger, not even as a reminder of betrayal, but as a piece of the man I once loved. He was gentle, thoughtful, even helped me around the house. Over time, I noticed something surprising. The pain started to fade, not because it disappeared, but because I finally understood that the past can't be rewritten, only accepted. I told my daughter Sarah about him. At first, she was furious. She said, "How can you just let him in after what Dad did to you?" I said, "Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over pain." For the first time, Sarah didn't argue. She just looked at me quietly and said, "Maybe you're stronger than I thought, Mom. Maybe. Or maybe I'd just run out of tears." Daniel didn't ask for a dime. He just came every Sunday to have tea with me. We'd talk about my husband, his father, and little by little, the anger in my heart started turning into understanding. I realized something powerful. The truth doesn't destroy families. Secrets do. And even though my husband made mistakes, he also left behind something good. A chance for two people to heal from pain they didn't ask for. Watch my next story. It's about the day my daughter and Daniel met face to face, and what she said that shocked us both. When my daughter met the man who claimed to be her father's secret son, I expected anger, screaming, denial. But instead she looked him in the eyes and said something I'll never forget. "You destroyed my family, but maybe you can help fix what's left of it." After weeks of silence, I finally told Sarah the truth. She deserved to know. And after everything that had happened between us, the betrayal, the lies, the pain, I thought maybe the truth would finally bring peace. But peace never comes easy, especially when it's buried under years of hurt. When I first told Sarah about Daniel, she didn't believe me. She laughed. But it wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from humor. It was cold, sharp, angry. "Mom, how can you even talk to that man? He's proof that Dad cheated on you." Her voice was shaking. She looked at me like I'd betrayed her all over again. But what she didn't understand was, Daniel didn't choose any of this. He didn't ask to be born in secret. I tried to explain, but she wouldn't hear it. She grabbed her bag and said, "I'm done, Mom. You can play happy family with your new son all you want." Then she walked out, and for days, she didn't call. Meanwhile, Daniel kept visiting. Not every day, but enough for me to feel like I wasn't alone anymore. He helped fix the porch steps, repainted the fence, even replaced the old light in the hallway that had been broken for years. He didn't talk much about my husband, and when he did, it was never bitter. He'd just say, "I wish I knew him, but I guess, in a way I do, through you." One afternoon I showed him old photo albums, pictures of my husband holding Sarah as a baby, birthdays, Christmas mornings. Daniel smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. He said quietly, "He looks happy." And I said, "He was, but happiness doesn't always mean honesty." It was strange how easy it was to talk to him, even though he was living proof of my husband's biggest secret. A week later, Sarah called. Her voice sounded calmer. "Mom," she said, "I've been thinking. Maybe I should meet him. Just once." I didn't know if that was a good idea, but something in her tone told me she needed this. Not for him, but for herself. So I invited Daniel to come over for dinner. I didn't tell him Sarah would be there. I just said, "I'd like you to meet someone important." That evening, the house felt heavy. The smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen, but even the air seemed nervous. When Daniel arrived, he brought flowers. Yellow daisies, my favorite. He smiled and said, "For you, Mrs. Whitmore." Before I could respond, Sarah walked in. The air froze. Their eyes met, and for a long moment nobody said a word. Daniel stood up first. "You must be Sarah," he said softly. She nodded, her arms crossed, her face cold. "I don't know what to say," he continued. "Except, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause any pain." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Pain? You think this is just pain? My dad lied to my mom for decades. And you're just here, acting like it's all okay?" Daniel lowered his eyes. "I know it's not okay. I just wanted to understand him. That's all." Sarah shook her head. "You can't understand someone who destroyed a family." That's when I stepped in. "Sarah, enough. He didn't destroy anything. Your father's choices did. And you know what? We can't keep punishing someone who had nothing to do with it." She looked at me, eyes full of hurt. "So you're just replacing Dad with him now?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm trying to heal. And you should too." She didn't say anything after that. She just turned away and whispered, "I can't do this." But Daniel stopped her. "Wait," he said, pulling something from his pocket. It was an old watch, rusty, faded, but I recognized it instantly. My husband's watch, the one he wore every day until the day he died. Daniel said, My mother kept this all these years. She said he told her it belonged to someone special, and that one day I'd understand why. He placed the watch on the table. Sarah stared at it, tears forming in her eyes. She picked it up and whispered, "I remember this. He used to let me play with it when I was little." The anger on her face slowly melted. For a long moment she just stood there, holding that watch, like she was holding on to a piece of her father again. Finally, she looked at Daniel and said, "You know what's crazy? You look like him when you smile." Daniel smiled weakly. "I get that a lot." She took a deep breath and said, "I can't forgive him for what he did. But maybe we don't have to hate each other because of it." I felt my eyes sting. That one sentence. It was more healing than all the apologies in the world. From that night on, things changed. Slowly, but they did. Sarah and Daniel started talking. At first, it was awkward. Small talk, polite smiles. But over time, they found common ground. They'd sit together at dinner, share stories about my husband, their father, two people connected by pain, slowly learning how to rebuild. One evening, I overheard Sarah telling Daniel, "You know, you're not to blame for what happened. Neither is Mom. The only person who really messed up is gone. So maybe we should stop letting him control what's left of our family." Daniel just nodded, quietly wiping his eyes. And I knew, in that moment, that forgiveness had finally started to bloom inside both of them. It's been months now. We still have our scars. Some days they ache more than others, but we've built something new out of all the pain. Understanding. Sarah brings her kids over every weekend. Daniel plays with them in the garden. And every time I see him laugh, I catch glimpses of my husband in his smile. Sometimes I still sit by the window at night, holding that old watch, listening to its silent tick, reminding me that time heals, but truth redeems. My family isn't perfect, but for the first time in years, it feels real. And that's enough. Watch my next story. The one where I discover the letter my husband left hidden for me all these years. I thought all the secrets were buried with him. But last week, while cleaning the attic, I found something that shattered me. A letter from my husband written 20 years ago. And what he confessed inside changed everything I believed about my marriage, my daughter, and my life. For months, I thought I'd finally made peace with my past. Sarah and Daniel had started to rebuild a fragile relationship. And for the first time in years, I could sleep without waking up in anger or guilt. But sometimes life waits until you're ready to heal, before showing you one last wound you didn't know was still bleeding. And that wound came in the form of a dust-covered wooden box hidden in the attic. I was cleaning out old boxes, getting rid of things that no longer mattered. Old clothes, broken picture frames, a few letters yellowed with time. Then, under a loose wooden plank, I noticed something odd. A box with my husband's handwriting on it. It said, "For her eyes when she's ready to forgive." I froze. My heart started racing. For a long time, I just stared at it, afraid to open it, afraid to know. But curiosity has a way of whispering louder than fear. When I finally lifted the lid, I saw two things inside. A folded letter and a photo. The photo was old, taken long before Sarah was born. It showed my husband smiling beside a woman I didn't recognize. And in her arms, a little boy, Daniel. I sat down on the attic floor, the photo trembling in my hands. He'd kept this, all these years. Then I looked at the letter. The envelope was sealed, the paper fragile, and across it, in his handwriting, were the words, "To my wife, if you ever find this, I owe you the truth." I unfolded it carefully. His handwriting was messy, rushed, emotional. As I began to read, my tears started before I reached the second line. He wrote, "My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, it means the truth finally found its way out, and I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, but for what I took from you. You deserved a husband who was whole, but I was never that man. Long before we married, there was someone else. Her name was Evelyn. I loved her once, truly. But life had other plans. When I met you, you brought peace into my chaos. You gave me a home, a reason to wake up. But when Evelyn came back sick and alone, I couldn't turn her away. She had Daniel, and I couldn't watch them suffer. I thought I could help without hurting anyone. I thought lies could protect love. But lies only build walls. I never wanted Daniel to grow up in shame. And I never wanted you to know the pain I carried. I know you'll hate me. You have every right to. But please, if you ever find this, tell Daniel that I loved him too. And tell Sarah. Her father was weak, but he never stopped loving her mother. Always yours, Thomas. By the time I finished reading, the paper was soaked in tears. I didn't know if I was angry, heartbroken, or relieved. For years I'd built a story in my head. That he cheated because I wasn't enough. That he lied because I wasn't worth honesty. But as I held that letter, I realized he wasn't trying to replace me. He was just a broken man trying to do right by two wrongs. And maybe that's the saddest part. That love can make us do terrible things and still feel pure in the moment. I didn't know what to do. Should I show Sarah? Should I tell Daniel? The thought of reopening that wound scared me. We had just started to heal. But truth doesn't stay buried forever. So that evening I called them both. When they arrived, they could tell I'd been crying. Sarah asked softly, "Mom, what's wrong?" I handed her the letter. "I found this," I said quietly. "It's from your father." Sarah read it out loud, her voice trembling with every word. Daniel sat silently beside her, his hands clenched together. When she finished, there was a long silence. No one spoke, only the sound of the clock ticking in the hallway. Finally, Sarah whispered, He loved you, Mom. He really did." Daniel nodded. "He loved all of us. He just didn't know how to show it." Sarah looked at Daniel, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Understanding. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Maybe we're more alike than we thought," she said softly. "We've both been living in his shadow. Maybe it's time to step out of it." That night we sat together for hours, sharing memories of the man we each knew differently. The father, the husband, the ghost who'd haunted all of us in our own ways. For the first time, we didn't cry out of anger. We cried out of release. Daniel told stories about his mother, Evelyn. How she'd always spoken kindly about my husband. How she said he was torn between two worlds but never cruel. Sarah listened, and instead of bitterness, she smiled and said, "Maybe that's why he smiled like that in old pictures. Like he was holding two lives in one heart." I laughed through my tears, because that was exactly who he was. Flawed, foolish, but still somehow full of love. Before they left, I placed the letter back into the box and said, "This isn't a story of betrayal anymore. It's a story of forgiveness." Sarah hugged me tight. Daniel joined in. For the first time, the three of us, connected by one man's mistakes, felt like a family. That night, I sat by the window with that old watch ticking softly beside me, the one Daniel had given back. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I felt peace because I finally understood. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what someone did. It's about freeing yourself from what it did to you. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that every secret comes with a reason. Not to destroy us, but to teach us. My husband's letter didn't erase the pain, but it helped me see that even in his failure, there was love. And sometimes, that's enough. I don't look at that letter with bitterness anymore. I look at it as proof that even broken hearts can write beautiful endings. Watch my next story, the one where I reveal what I found hidden inside that same box, something my husband never meant anyone to see. I thought the letter was the end of it all, but when I lifted the bottom lining of that same box, I found a second compartment, and inside it, a sealed envelope with a bank logo in my husband's handwriting. He'd written just 3 words on it, for when you're ready. I had no idea that what was inside would turn everything I believed about my husband, my daughter, even myself, completely upside down. It had been a month since we read his first letter. Things were finally calm. Sarah and Daniel were learning to be siblings in their own strange way, and I thought the past had finally stopped haunting us. But that box kept calling me. I didn't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe fear. Either way, that night I decided to open it one last time. The false bottom was cleverly built. A small wooden lip glued perfectly flat, easy to miss unless you were looking for it. When I pried it up, dust fell into my lap, and I saw 2 folded documents tied with a ribbon. The first was a letter addressed to me. The second was a set of papers with a bank's watermark and seal. Something about a trust account. My heart began to race again. I sat by the window, the streetlight spilling soft orange on the page, and I began to read. Mary, if you found this, it means you've already forgiven me. Or at least tried to. There's something I never told anyone. Not Sarah, not Daniel, not even Evelyn. Years ago, when the company went under, I invested everything I had in a private account. It was meant for you and Sarah. But when I found out about Daniel, I changed everything. I set up a trust in your name, but the interest would go to him until he turned 35. Then, after that, it would return to you and Sarah equally. I wanted to make sure neither of you would ever struggle, even if you never forgave me. Please go to the First City Bank, Vault Dubra 427. Tell them the code, June 14th, 1979. You'll understand why I did it when you get there. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. June 14th, 1979. That was our wedding date. The next morning, I showed the letter to Sarah and Daniel. Sarah looked shocked. Mom, that's almost 40 years ago. Daniel said nothing. He just looked pale. I told them both I was going to the bank. Sarah insisted on coming. Daniel hesitated but finally nodded. Maybe we all needed to see it together. The bank was old. Mahogany counters, brass handles. The kind of place that smelled like paper and history. When I told the manager I was there about Vault Navarro 37, his expression changed immediately. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a small, dusty safe deposit box. Inside it was an envelope with my husband's signature, a faded photo of the 3 of us from when Sarah was little, and a stack of certificates and banknotes, the manager explained. The trust had been accumulating interest for decades. The total was just over 4 million, Sarah gasped. Daniel took a step back like the floor had tilted beneath him. And I just stood there numb. $4 million. All that time, I'd believed he'd wasted our savings, that his secrets had left us with nothing. But he'd been protecting us, both families, without telling anyone, Sarah whispered. He did this for us? I nodded slowly. Yes, he couldn't say it while he was alive. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he didn't want to be forgiven with money. Daniel stared at the floor. He never stopped caring. Even for me. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't about money at all. It was his way of saying sorry in the only language he had left. The lawyer who handled the trust explained that it could only be accessed if all 3 of us signed together. My husband's final condition. Sarah crossed her arms. So we either share it or no one gets anything? I could feel tension rising again. Old wounds, old fears. Daniel said quietly. I don't want a cent. I just want him to rest in peace. But I saw guilt in his eyes. He'd been living paycheck to paycheck, barely making rent, yet still refused the money. I put my hand on his shoulder and said, Then maybe you should take it. Not for you, but for what he wanted. This isn't about forgiveness anymore. It's about finishing what he started. We signed the documents together. When it was done, the banker handed me one more envelope, sealed, labeled Final Instructions. Inside, another note. Use it wisely. Give it to those who need it more than you. Love, even when it hurts. We walked out of that bank in silence. The rain had just started again. Gentle, cleansing. Sarah slipped her arm through mine. "Mom," she said softly. "I think he finally found peace." I smiled through tears. Maybe we all did. That evening we sat around the kitchen table, the same one where we'd read his first letter, months ago. Only this time there was no anger, just quiet gratitude. Daniel suggested we start a small charity in his name, a fund for single mothers and children, so no family would have to choose between love and survival again. Sarah agreed instantly. We called it the June 14th Foundation, named after the day love started and secrets began. And that night, as I looked out the window, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Peace that didn't come from forgetting, but from finally understanding. A week later, while organizing the trust papers, I found one last folded sheet hidden between them. Not a letter this time. Just a single line, written in that same shaky handwriting. "You were always the only one." I pressed it to my heart and whispered, "I know." For years I'd wondered why he lied, why he kept two worlds apart. But now I understood. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He was just trying to love everyone. The only way he knew how. And maybe that's what love really is. Not perfect honesty, but imperfect devotion. Life after that changed in small ways. Sarah moved closer. Daniel started teaching at the local school. And every Sunday we met for dinner. No secrets, no walls, just laughter echoing through the house again. Sometimes, Daniel brings flowers to the grave and talks to him softly, as if updating him on our lives. Other times, Sarah and I sit on the porch, watching the sunset and wondering if he'd be proud. I think he would, because even though his lies nearly destroyed us, his love rebuilt us stronger. And that's something even death couldn't take away. If love were a book, ours would be messy, filled with torn pages and rewritten lines. But it would still be beautiful, because it's real. And as I close this chapter of my life, I know one thing for certain. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it gives you a future. Watch my next story, about the stranger who showed up claiming to be connected to that same trust, and how I discovered my husband's plan wasn't finished yet. Just when I thought the past had finally stopped knocking, someone did. Literally. A man in a black coat showed up at my door, holding a letter with my husband's name on it, and words that made my heart stop. He promised me half of everything. It had been 3 peaceful months since we discovered the trust. The June 14th Foundation was helping families already. Sarah and Daniel were closer than ever, and I finally felt the silence in my house was gentle instead of haunting. But peace never lasts when secrets are involved, especially the kind of secrets my husband used to keep. That evening, the rain had just started again, the same kind of rain that always seems to bring ghosts back with it. When I opened the door, the man standing there was in his 40s, sharp-featured, calm but too confident. He introduced himself as Michael Reed. Then he handed me a sealed document. "I'm sorry for the intrusion, ma'am," he said, "but I believe the late Thomas Evans included me in his estate." My knees went weak. Another name tied to Thomas. Another secret. Michael explained that years ago he'd worked for my husband as an accountant when Thomas's company was failing. According to him, they'd made a private deal. Thomas promised him half of a hidden investment if Michael kept silent about certain off-record transactions. He said he'd kept quiet for 40 years. Now, hearing about the trust, he believed that money belonged partly to him. I felt anger rise in me. That trust was meant for his family, I said firmly. But Michael only smiled. "Maybe. But your husband wasn't just your husband, Mrs. Evans. He was a businessman, and business always leaves loose ends." After he left, I sat by the fire, turning that document over and over. Part of me wanted to tear it up. Another part whispered, what if he's telling the truth? I remembered my husband's restless nights, his long phone calls, his secretive trips. Could there be another piece of his past still hidden? The next morning I called our lawyer, Mr. Harris. He asked me to bring everything in. When he saw Michael's document, his brow furrowed. This looks real, he said quietly. But it's incomplete. The signatures are copies. Then he looked at me. If your husband really made a deal like this, the proof would be somewhere only he could keep it. The vault. That afternoon I went back to the bank. Sarah and Daniel insisted on coming. We asked to inspect vault number 427 again. Inside the box were only the papers we'd already seen. But when Daniel tapped the bottom, it sounded hollow. He pried it open carefully with a small penknife, and there it was. A thin envelope wrapped in plastic, dated June 20th, 1985 inside. A single handwritten page read, "If anything happens to me, contact MR. He knows where the rest is. MR. Michael Reed." Sarah gasped. Daniel muttered. So he wasn't lying. But beneath that note was another, older paper. A legal addendum, signed and stamped. It stated clearly, upon fulfillment of the June 14th trust, the secondary fund in account 7829 shall be transferred to the June 14th Foundation. No mention of Michael Reed. Something didn't add up. I invited Michael back to talk. When he arrived, he looked too sure of himself. I placed both documents on the table. Care to explain this? I asked. His eyes flickered. He tried to grab the old note, but Daniel stopped him. This one proves you knew about the trust, I said. But it doesn't prove it was ever yours. He stayed silent for a moment, then sighed. Fine, you want the truth? Your husband owed me money. He asked me to hide one of his accounts so creditors wouldn't take it. He said he'd make it right someday. When he died, I figured that day would never come. Sarah looked disgusted. You blackmailed a dead man's family for cash? Michael's voice hardened. I'm not the villain here. Your father used me. I just want what's mine. I looked at him quietly. Then prove it. A week later, Mr. Harris called. During a routine archive search, he'd found a safe deposit key registered under my husband's initials. TER. We opened the new box together. Inside was an old cassette tape, labeled June 20th, Final Agreement. When we played it, the voice crackled through static. Thomas's voice. Unmistakable. Michael, you've done what I asked. I can't pay you now, but I'll make it right. The account we set up will go to the foundation under Mary's name. You'll receive your fair share through the consulting fees I promised. After that, we're even. Then another voice. Michael's. You're sure your wife won't find out? She doesn't need to. By the time she does, this money will be doing something good. The tape clicked off. Proof. He'd already been paid. Decades ago. When we confronted Michael with the recording, he went pale. He tried to talk his way out of it, but Mr. Harris warned that forging claims could lead to charges. In the end, Michael just muttered, Guess he outsmarted me even after death. Then he left, and this time, I knew he wouldn't come back. For the first time, I felt something new about my husband. Pride. He hadn't been perfect, but he'd been clever enough to protect his family and his vision. Daniel smiled faintly. Seems like he planned everything, didn't he? I nodded, right down to the last storm at our door. After that ordeal, I realized something. Every time I thought I'd uncovered the last of his secrets, another one appeared. But each time it led not to pain, but to purpose. Maybe that was his way of keeping us connected, teaching us lessons even from beyond. Sarah started handling the foundation's accounts. Daniel began using his teaching skills to help children from families torn apart by lies and loss. And me? I learned that truth isn't a single moment. It's a lifetime of uncovering pieces of who we are and who we loved. One quiet evening, As I watched the rain slide down the window again, I played the cassette one more time, not for proof, for comfort. Hearing his voice calm and steady reminded me of the nights he'd whisper stories into the dark. At the very end of the tape, after a long silence, a faint click sounded. Then his voice again, softer. "If you're hearing this, Mary, it means I kept my promise. Don't let the world make you doubt that I loved you. Everything I did, even the mistakes, was for you." I pressed stop and sat there for a long time, tears falling. But no pain in them, just gratitude, because even though he'd left behind chaos, he'd also left a map, and somehow, following it, led us all home. The past didn't end with forgiveness. It ended with truth, and truth, I've learned, isn't something you find once. It's something you keep finding in the people you choose to love, again and again. Watch my next story about the mysterious envelope I received a month later, with handwriting that looked exactly like his. When I opened the envelope, my hands trembled before my eyes even saw the words. It wasn't the handwriting that scared me. It was whose handwriting it was. Sarah's. I'd expected another ghost from my husband's past. Maybe another forgotten account or apology from someone long gone. But this was from inside my home. It began with just 3 words. "Please forgive me." The letter was written in shaky ink, like someone who had cried while writing. "Grandma, I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else. The Foundation's account isn't what you think. I used part of the money, not for myself, but I can't hide it anymore." My chest tightened. I sat there staring at the page, hearing the rain against the window again. The same rain that always seems to bring back secrets. Sarah had been handling the Foundation's finances for months. She'd been so dedicated, so careful. Why would she write something like this? I called her immediately. No answer. Daniel picked up instead. "Grandma, she's at the Foundation office. I think you should come." When I arrived, Sarah was sitting alone at her desk, papers scattered everywhere, eyes red from crying. "I didn't steal, Grandma," she said before I even asked. "I just moved some funds, temporarily." "For what?" She hesitated, then pulled out a photograph of a young girl. Dark hair, pale skin, a frail smile. Her name's Emily. She's 12. Her mother's one of the workers we support. Emily needed a bone marrow transplant, and there was no time for approvals or forms. I used part of the reserved fund to pay the hospital. My heart ached. It wasn't greed. It was desperation. But rules were rules, and donors were already asking for audits. "Sarah," I whispered, "you should have told me." "I tried," she said, tears spilling. "But you were finally happy again. You had peace for the first time in years. I didn't want to ruin that." Before I could answer, Daniel walked in with a folder. "Grandma, there's something else." Inside were transaction records, not just Sarah's transfer, but several small withdrawals over the last few months, all authorized under Daniel's signature. I turned to him, feeling a cold wave crawl up my spine. "Daniel." "Why?" He didn't deny it. He looked exhausted. "I used it to fix the school library. They cut funding, and I couldn't watch the kids read on broken chairs. I thought I could repay it when the next donation came in." I sank into the nearest chair. Both of them, the only 2 people I trusted completely, had betrayed the same trust I built in my husband's name. And the worst part? They had done it for kindness. For 2 days the house was silent. We barely spoke. I kept replaying that tape of my husband's voice, wondering what he'd say now. Maybe he'd scold them for carelessness, or maybe he'd smile because they had done exactly what he would have. Broken the rules for someone who needed help. Still, consequences don't disappear just because intentions are good. The Foundation board had called for a meeting. They wanted answers. The conference room was cold and bright. Reporters waited outside. Whispers filled the hall. Sarah sat beside me, head down. Daniel fidgeted with his tie. When the chairman asked for explanations, I stood up before either of them could speak. "The fault is mine," I said. "I trusted too easily, and I didn't watch closely enough. But if you look at the receipts, you'll see that every dollar went towards saving lives or building futures. Not luxury, not greed, compassion." There was murmuring. Some sympathetic, some doubtful. One woman, Mrs. Taylor, a longtime donor, spoke softly. "Maybe that's the problem, Mary. We built this on compassion, but without structure. Compassion collapses." Her words stung, because she was right. We lost 2 major sponsors that week. The foundation's reputation was shaky. Sarah offered to resign. Daniel stopped going to meetings. I spent nights by the window, watching lights from the city fade through the fog, wondering if maybe the family curse was real. That every Evans, no matter how pure their heart, was destined to destroy what they built. Then, one evening, I received a call from Emily's mother. Through tears, she said, "Ma'am, the surgery worked. Emily's awake. She wanted me to thank you." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. That phone call changed everything. I realized the money hadn't been misused. It had been used. Maybe not by the rules, but by the heart. So I gathered Sarah and Daniel the next morning. "We're not running from this," I said. "We're rebuilding it, but this time, we'll do it the right way." We renamed the project inside the foundation the June 14th Promise Fund. It would cover emergency aid for families who couldn't wait for paperwork, and every transaction would be transparent. Sarah looked relieved. Daniel smiled for the first time in weeks. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Maybe the lesson isn't to keep secrets. It's to turn them into promises." Just when I thought we'd found balance again, a letter arrived. Again without a return address. Inside was a short note typed neatly. "You've built something beautiful. Don't let the same hands destroy it again." And beneath the paper, a flash drive. Daniel plugged it into his laptop. Inside were scanned documents, dated months before Sarah's confession. Financial records, anonymous transfers from a hidden account labeled Terre Reserves, my late husband's initials. The file ended with a message. "The June 14th fund still holds one last secret." We all looked at each other, speechless. Sarah whispered, "Grandma, what did Grandpa really plan?" That night I couldn't sleep. I opened my husband's old diary again, the one he kept locked away. Flipping through brittle pages, I found one sentence that felt like a whisper from the grave. "If they ever learn to use love without fear, they'll understand everything I left behind." I don't know what the next secret will be, but one thing's certain. My story isn't over. Neither is his. Watch the next story, when I uncover what was truly hidden in my husband's final account. I thought we'd finally earned peace. But peace doesn't last when there's money hidden in silence. The night I opened that flash drive again, I saw a name I never expected. Someone from inside our own foundation. After weeks of calm, the June 14th Promise Fund was thriving again. Families were being helped. Reporters were writing good stories for once. I'd started to believe the ghosts were finally gone. Then Daniel found a hidden folder in that flash drive, buried under layers of data encryption. The file was named TR Reserves, Access List. When we opened it, a spreadsheet appeared. Rows of coded numbers, account names, transfer dates, and one entry at the bottom that froze my blood. Authorized access, R. Taylor. Rebecca Taylor, one of our oldest board members. The same woman who'd stood up in that hearing weeks ago and told me compassion wasn't enough. Sarah frowned. She said she'd withdrawn support after the audit. Daniel scrolled further. Looks like she didn't withdraw, she redirected. There were transactions from her personal charity account into the same bank my husband had used 40 years ago. But the amounts didn't match any of our ledgers. Some were 6 figures. I couldn't believe it. Rebecca had been our ally for decades. She'd known my husband since the early foundation days. Still, the pattern was too precise to ignore. Maybe she found the reserves before we did, Sarah whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. Or maybe she created them. We decided not to confront her right away. Instead, I asked Mr. Harris, our lawyer, to quietly verify the accounts. 2 days later, he called. Mary, these funds were opened 20 years ago, and the only people with legal authority back then were your husband and Mrs. Rebecca Taylor. When I invited her for tea, she came smiling, calm, elegant as always, but her eyes were sharper than usual. Mary, she said, I heard you reopened some old files. Digging into the past can be dangerous, dear. I slid the printed records across the table. Her smile didn't fade. So you found the reserves? Why? I asked. Why would you hide that from me? She leaned back. Because your husband asked me to. The words hit me like a slap. Rebecca's voice softened. Thomas came to me a few months before he died. He said if anything ever happened, there'd be money left over. He didn't trust the world. Not the banks. Not even his family yet. He asked me to guard it until he was sure you and the children would understand what it was for. What was it for? I demanded. Her answer came quietly. For truth. For a time when the foundation would need it most. I stared at her. Then why take it? Why move the money into your own account? Her calm cracked for the first time. Because the board was collapsing, Mary. We were bleeding funds. I used part of it to keep the lights on. And yes, I intended to return it. But after your husband died, everything changed. She looked down, voice trembling. I was afraid. Afraid you'd think I stole from him. It sounded believable. Too believable. But when I asked for receipts or proof, she hesitated. I destroyed the paperwork, she said finally. I didn't want anyone to find out. That was when I knew something was wrong. People who tell the truth don't burn evidence. When she left, I watched her walk down the path, her coat swaying like a curtain, hiding something darker underneath. Sarah turned to me. Do you believe her? I want to, I said. But believing is how we keep getting hurt. Daniel spent nights combing through digital archives. One evening, he burst into the living room holding a printout. Grandma, look at this. It was a transfer receipt dated 2 weeks after my husband's funeral. Rebecca's signature again. The money, $1.2 million, had been moved into a shell company named Marbridge Consulting, and the address listed? Our old office building. The one Rebecca managed after Thomas's death. The betrayal was no longer a guess. It was a fact. We decided to confront her publicly during the next board meeting. When she walked in, everyone rose respectfully. No one yet knew what was about to unfold. I began calmly. We found new information regarding the TER reserves account. Her eyes darted toward me, then the folder in my hand. Rebecca, I said, why was $1.2 million transferred into your private company right after Thomas died? The room went silent. She tried to speak, but Daniel projected the documents on the screen behind us. Every signature. Every timestamp. Her voice shook. It wasn't what it looks like. Thomas told me to keep it safe, away from greedy hands. One of the younger members scoffed. Then why is your name on the ownership papers of a luxury apartment bought with that money? Her mask finally cracked. You don't understand, she screamed. He promised me. He promised me he'd leave something for me too. The room spun. She collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Through broken breaths, she told the truth none of us were ready for. Years ago, before I met Thomas, they'd worked closely. He had trusted her, maybe more than he should have. When he married me, she buried her feelings, but they never disappeared. He wanted to make it right, she said. He gave me that fund, not for greed, but as closure. He said I'd earned it for standing by him. I felt a cold, heavy silence settle. It wasn't anger now. It was grief for the woman she used to be. Rebecca, I whispered. If that's true, then why didn't he tell me? Her eyes filled with tears. Because he still loved you. And he didn't want you to know how much he'd hurt me. The board voted unanimously to reclaim the funds. Rebecca resigned quietly the next day. Before she left, she stopped by my door. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just said, "Thomas always said you were stronger than him. Prove him right." I watched her walk away through the rain, a familiar pattern by now. Ghosts leaving in storms. That night, I played the old cassette one last time. In the faint static after his final recorded words, I swear I heard something new, a whisper I'd never noticed before. "If you ever find Rebecca, tell her I kept my promise." I closed my eyes. Maybe he had. Maybe love, in all its messy, painful forms, was the real inheritance he left behind. Weeks later, the foundation stabilized again. Sarah oversaw transparency reforms. Daniel built new programs for children. And me, I learned that truth doesn't destroy families. Silence does. As I filed the last document about the TER reserves, I found one more sealed envelope inside the folder, addressed in my husband's handwriting. "To Mary, for when the storm finally passes." I haven't opened it yet, because sometimes the only way to keep moving forward is to let one secret stay unopened. For now, watch my next story. When I finally open that last letter and discover the truth my husband wanted me to find. I waited for months before opening that letter. Every day I would see it, resting quietly inside the drawer beside my husband's old watch, a white envelope with my name in his handwriting. Familiar, unshakable, like time had paused just to remind me that the past was still unfinished. But that morning, something felt different. The house was silent. The rain had stopped, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what truth might sound like. So, I opened it. The first line read, "My dearest Mary, if you are reading this, then the storm has finally passed." My hands trembled. His writing was shaky, uneven, but gentle. "You always said I carried too many secrets. You were right. I didn't keep them from you because I didn't trust you. I kept them because I wanted to protect you. From what I did, and from what I couldn't fix." Tears blurred the ink, but I kept reading. The reserve fund was never about money. It was a promise, a safety net for the people our foundation couldn't save. But as the years went on, I realized something worse. The system we built to help others had started helping itself. I stopped breathing for a moment. Even from the grave, his guilt echoed louder than any storm. He wrote that he'd uncovered corruption within their own foundation years before his death. Several members had been diverting funds, slowly, carefully, using fake charity branches abroad. He'd gathered proof but couldn't expose them without destroying everything. So he created what he called TR Reserves, a shadow fund to recover the stolen money quietly. He used aliases, blind accounts, and trusted only two people, Rebecca Taylor and himself. "Rebecca was my strength when I was building all this," he wrote. "But my mistake was confusing loyalty with love." He confessed he had once made her believe there could be more between them. That in a moment of weakness he'd said words he could never take back. "You had every part of me, Mary, except the one that belonged to guilt. That part lived with her. The honesty cut deeper than betrayal ever could, because I knew then he hadn't just hidden money, he'd hidden his shame." The next page revealed something I hadn't expected at all. A map was sketched on the back, an old address, not the foundation, not the bank, but our first home, the place we'd lived before Daniel was even born. Beneath it he wrote, "If you go there, look beneath the cedar tree. That's where the truth begins and ends." I didn't waste another second. By evening I was standing under that same cedar tree, its branches older, thicker, but still whispering the same tune they did when we were young. I started digging, and after a few minutes my hand hit a metal box. Inside, wrapped in layers of wax paper, was a small cassette tape and a photograph of Thomas with a young boy I didn't recognize. That night I played the tape on my old recorder. His voice filled the room again, faint, trembling but clear enough to break my heart. If you're hearing this, Mary, I want you to know that the reserves were never mine to begin with. They belonged to someone else. Someone I wronged long ago. His name was Ethan." He paused. "He was the son of one of our workers. The man who died on site during the early foundation construction. The company blamed him for the accident. I knew the truth but didn't speak up. That silence cost that family everything." I covered my mouth in disbelief. "Ethan grew up believing I was his enemy. I tried to make amends by creating a scholarship in his father's name. But when I found out he was living in the streets, I set aside part of the TER funds for him. I told Rebecca to find him, but she never did. She kept that money, said it was safer in her hands." The tape crackled with static. "If you ever find him, Mary, tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I left something behind for him, something I couldn't give while I was alive. Forgiveness." For weeks, I searched every record I could find. Old news reports, public databases, orphanage listings. Finally, I found him. Ethan Clark, now 42, living quietly in a small town outside the city. He was working as a carpenter, the same trade his father had before the accident. When I met him, he looked nothing like his father. But his eyes were filled with the same silent grief I'd seen in my husband's. "I knew you'd come someday," he said softly. "I always hoped someone would." I handed him the photograph. His fingers trembled as he touched it. "That was the last day I saw him," he whispered. "He told me he was going to make things right, and then he died before he could." We talked for hours. About Thomas, about the past, about forgiveness. He told me he never wanted the money. He just wanted to know why no one had ever said sorry. So we created a new initiative together. The Clark Fund, a branch of the foundation dedicated to helping the children of laborers and widows. Every dollar recovered from the TER reserves went there. For the first time, the shadow that followed our name began to fade. When the project launched, I stood on stage and read the final line of Thomas's letter aloud. "If I cannot undo what I did, then let the ones I love do better in my name." The applause that followed wasn't just noise. It was forgiveness echoing through generations. Months passed. The foundation grew stronger, but my days grew quieter. One evening I found myself in the study again, looking at his photograph. I whispered, "You could have told me." And for a moment I almost heard him whisper back, "I did. I just needed time for you to be ready." That night I went outside and sat under the cedar tree. The moonlight filtered through the branches, and I realized it wasn't a grave we'd buried secrets in. It was a seed, and from it grew everything we'd ever built. Love, loss, and legacy. Sarah became the new director of the foundation. Daniel started his own nonprofit focusing on mental health for widowed seniors. And Ethan, he became part of our family, quietly mending the cracks his father's death once left behind. Before the foundation's annual gala, I recorded one last message. If anyone ever listens to this, remember, legacies aren't built from perfect lives, but from broken hearts that chose to rebuild. And I left that recording beside Thomas's old cassette. Together they would tell the story that took half a century to end. The video would fade to the sound of gentle rain, the camera slowly zooming out from the cedar tree. The screen fades to black, and then one final line appears. For every secret buried in silence, there's someone brave enough to dig for the truth. And then, my voice one last time. This was our story, and now it's yours.